Welcome to Astounding Talk Radio with Reggie Stearns. Join us as we explore the how and the why and the forces that shape and mold our world. Talk radio is so astounding, there's no frequency to contain it. On today's show, we have the CEO and founder of Bitcoin Armory, Alan Reiner. If you're familiar with Bitcoin, you know that it's a payment system, and some call it a currency, though only governments can legally authorize or mint currency. Bitcoin is an electronic store of value, just like currency, however. Armory is a company that the founder started to solve enterprise and personal level security and secure storage or wallets, which Bitcoin uses to identify its owner, maintain an encrypted account. If you've heard of Bitcoin but did not understand it, you will understand it by the end of today's show. On today's show, we spend a large portion of it discussing the Bitcoin and then conclude with a too brief orientation to Armory. But if you want more information, check out today's show notes at astoundingtalk.com/14102. But you can also learn about Armory by going to its website at bitcoinarmory.com. Anyway, let's jump into the show. Alan Reiner is CEO and founder of Armory Technologies, Inc., a core developer of the Armory Bitcoin wallet, which is a popular open source wallet for the Bitcoin. Prior to Armory, Alan worked for 7 years developing image and video processing algorithms for the Department of Defense as a contractor. He has degrees in applied mathematics and engineering mechanics, and additional background in statistics, data mining, cryptology. Alan has become one of the top Bitcoin experts in the community and a trusted source for security best practices and innovation. Well, Alan, thank you for joining us today. I think it's going to be a really interesting show. But before we get into this, tell us a little bit about your background, where you've worked in the past, and how you got involved in Bitcoin and got involved in Armory.
Sure. So I'm your stereotypical math nerd. I grew up as a huge fan of math and enjoying math and problem solving, and got into computers at a very young age. I ended up going to college for both math and engineering. And when I graduated, I came out and went to Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, where I worked as a physicist, working on defense contracts, doing missile defense. And I picked up a master's degree, also in math there. And during this time, which was probably around 2011, I had started to get into Bitcoin, which Bitcoin has, existed since 2009. But I had just heard about it, and I started getting into Bitcoin. I was probably one of the very early crowd to hear about it and get involved in it. And I started developing software in my free time, which is now known as Armory. I developed this software to help people secure Bitcoin. And since then, the software has become fairly popular. I quit my job. I didn't think I could get a job more interesting than missile defense, but this certainly made the cut. And now I've been one of the main contributors to kind of Bitcoin security innovations, and I get to speak at lots of conferences. And I contribute to the discussions and development of kind of Bitcoin topics and security concepts in the community.
It's a fascinating background. So you basically went from national defense to economic defense. For that way.
I'd say that might be a good way to put it.
I think it's going to be an interesting show, and let's just jump right into it.
All right. So I guess at the top level, I would say Bitcoin is to money as email is to written communications. Before email, we always mailed letters. Obviously, we're still mailing packages. We can't send those digitally, but letters and information was all transferred over ink and paper through the U.S. postal system. And now email has provided us a very efficient and mostly free way to do the same thing, saving paper, sending messages basically instantaneously. And Bitcoin is very similar in terms of its effect on money. And we see it as something that can go very much like email did, which is something that's going to be ubiquitous in the future, that and many times when it's time to pay for something, you would think, well, why would I send a check? Why would I use an insecure credit card number to give someone this authorization when I can just send them a Bitcoin payment and it's basically instantaneous, free,
Right.
and
You know,
secure.
plus with the new Apple iPhone coming out, they have a payment processing or money, electronic digital money within that, which is a perfect platform for Bitcoin as well. So I see the future going your direction.
Yeah, I definitely think that money is kind of antiquated in our world. A lot of things have gone digital, and money really hasn't. I mean, in some ways it has, but right now, if I wanted to pay you, Reggie, I have to send you a check. I have to write. I have to give you my credit card number. But if I want to send you an email, I can do so in about 12 seconds. And Bitcoin is kind of catching up. It is helping money catch up to that. In being able to, right now, I can just send you $10, $1 million, pretty much instantaneously over the computer.
Right, and of course with the fiat currencies, the U.S. currency, as we've seen in Greece, our Federal Reserve, our central bank, has been fractionalizing our money system, actually printing money out of thin air. And as they do it, as most governments have done this, they've made the currency sometimes very weak or worthless. I know we bailed Mexico out, 15, 20 years ago, something very similar to that. So I can see Bitcoin coming in, taking the role somewhat of currency. We'll see what the government's feeling about that, but a currency that probably that could not be manipulated by a central bank. So I see its future.
And that's exactly it. People hear the word decentralized and they may not know exactly what that means. But in the world of Bitcoin, the word decentralized means that there is no one owner or one person that can control it. In the case of the federal government and fiat, you have the government that controls it, and they can control its supply. They can print more of it. Whereas in Bitcoin, there is no one organization or company or person that has that control. It's controlled by all the users all at once. And the act of trying to create more money basically violates the rules of the system that all millions of people that are using it have agreed to. So Bitcoin is basically this decentralized system where it's run by all people at the same time, and in many ways that actually makes it very difficult for it to change, which in this case is a good thing, because we want the system to be static and we want the system to be well understood and for it to be predictable, unlike, say, money supplies and things like quantitative easing and these things wouldn't exist in the Bitcoin world.
Well, tell us some of the mechanics of Bitcoin. I know there's mining of the coin, there's a wallet, there's public and private keys,
Right.
all that stuff. So kind of give us a rundown how the mechanics work.
So I like to skip over mining because it tends to be more confusing than anything, or more confusing than helpful.
Okay.
What I'll say is that basically in 2009, Bitcoin was created by a person who decided to remain anonymous. But the nice thing about the system is that he has no control over it. His identity doesn't matter. Like I said, it's run by everyone all at once. So the system is basically, back in 2009, it was public. The system was created by essentially publishing, there's going to be 21 million Bitcoins that are divisible into millions, a millionth of a Bitcoin each. That here's the total amount of Bitcoins that will ever exist. Here's how they're going to be distributed through a process called mining. And here's how it's going to be transferred. And here's how we're going to verify that that coins have been moved. That someone owns the coins and how they can transfer it to others. And so in a way, it's kind of a social agreement between all the participants saying, this is all the money that's going to be in the system, here's how it's going to be owned and how it's going to be moved. And everyone who is part of the system implicitly agrees to that. And if you don't agree to that, then you're not part of the system. There's very strict rules to how, when you're running Bitcoin software on your system, and if your software doesn't follow those rules, you essentially don't exist to the rest of the network. So what in effect, what happened was we now have these 21 million units that are actually divisible into 8 decimal places, and it uses cryptography to control the movement of those 21 million units. And in the world of cryptography, we have things called public keys and private keys, and you can think of it very much like a public key is your bank account, and it's intended to be public. You can think of Bitcoin as a giant public bank account that anyone can query the balance of anyone else's account at any time. But what keeps it private is the fact that your public key is just a bunch of numbers, and anyone can see that public key 7483AB7QX has 10 Bitcoins, but they don't know who's associated with that. So your public key is a piece of information that you give to someone, and they can see the balance and they can pay it. They can deposit money into that public key. And your private key is very much like a signing pen, a pen with very special ink that can be used to authorize movement of coins. And these are all very well-known cryptographic pieces that are used whenever you go to a website that has SSL and you see the little HTTPS and the green bar in the upper corner. That it's using essentially the same technology. It's the server is giving you a public key, and you are using that to encrypt data or to authenticate data to authenticate that they are who
if
they
everybody
say they
can
are.
see it, it looks like a perfect opportunity for a hacker. So that's where the cryptology comes in. But I think it's also that makes people nervous. Well, it's public; everybody knows it, and your bank account, the bank knows it.
Well, so everyone can see it, but that doesn't mean they can move it. And that's the beauty of cryptography, is that you can distribute a piece of information, which is called the public key, which is intended to be public. There's no security risk in giving this out to people. And in fact, they use that to identify you. They use the public key to identify you, but you're the only person that holds the private key, which is the special signing pen. And as long as you keep that pen secure, as in no one else gets that information, then you're still the only person that can actually move the money. And so you can think of it as a pen with special ink, and Bitcoin is this big public bank, and in order to move money, you have to sign a Bitcoin check, and you have to have the right pen.
With it being public, then everybody knows it's there. It's not mysterious. You can't just make it up out of thin air. It's there, so that probably takes care of a lot of the quantitative easing or the making too much Bitcoin, thus too much inflation if you have too much in the system. The one thing that strikes me about Bitcoin is it's a free market approach to currency. Back in the old days, you used to trade a cow, for, 100 chickens or something like that. They went to currency, right? And then the government got involved, started fractionalizing the currency. But this actually is a voluntary exchange. It works because people trust each other. They can see it. And if it's not secure, then people move from it. Well, as the government, if they make it unsecure by printing too much, you can't move from it. So I think it's a perfect free market approach to it.
Well, I'll tell you one of the beauties of Bitcoin, and the reason why it gets some attention is because when I mentioned the word decentralized earlier, you're talking about a system of money that doesn't have a central authority. Typically you would have a bank that if I've got $10 in my account and I send you $10 and I send Alice $10 at the exact same time, whatever that means, whether I press the OK button in 2 different windows very quickly, or I write 2 checks, and they both try to cash them, which one wins, so to say. And in the case of the bank is going to be the one that decides, that whichever one came first, or they're going to call and find out which one you intended, or they're just going to reject both. And that would be a centralized system. Now, if we wanted to make that decentralized so there is no bank in the middle, we'd like that. But the problem is that for decades, experts thought it was impossible, that you have this money system full of people who are trying to scam each other. There's always going to be scammers. All these people made up this network made of people who don't trust each other. How can they all mutually agree that I actually transferred $10 to Bob and not Alice, even though I specified kind of, authorized both? How is the system supposed to resolve that? And before Bitcoin, experts thought it wasn't possible, that you couldn't have this network full of millions of users all agree on where something of such, great value is going. That you'd have scammers that build networks of, people who vote and say, well, no, I think Alice gets it, or I think Bob gets it, and it could be used to manipulate the system. And Bitcoin solved that problem. So that's one of the exciting things about Bitcoin, is that there really isn't a bank in the middle. And if you're curious how the system solves that, in many ways it's actually somewhat random. And that whoever, if I were to sign two transactions for the same money to two different people, it basically comes down to how many people saw one transaction first and how many people saw the other transaction first. And whichever side wins, it takes maybe 10 to 30 minutes, is statistically, if half the network saw one, half the network saw the other, then there's actually a 50% chance that one will be the other. And you have to wait, 10 or 20, maybe 30 minutes for that to be resolved. And when it's resolved,
just the different decentralized networks start authenticating it, right? So if you have one authentication, well, that's one, but if you have 50, that's a lot better, right?
Right. And in the Bitcoin world, it's called confirmations. And the gist of confirmations is it's a level of confidence that your transaction is going to be accepted. And one confirmation is reasonably good confidence, and 6 is pretty much guaranteed. Right. And in the case of a bank, where a bank is in the middle, they could confirm it very quickly. They are the authority. They have the decision, the power to make that decision. In the Bitcoin's compromise is they got rid of the bank, but you have all these people in the network, some of which may be in Kenya, Nigeria, on slow computers. Even their system has to agree. So the compromise is there's no central authority, but it takes time for the world to kind of agree on what really happened. And that comes in the form of confirmations.
Who owns all this information, and where are they decentralized? You talked about Kenya there, so where's all this information stored?
Basically, all the users of the system are storing it, and they're all verifying it. So, I won't lie, Bitcoin is a somewhat complex topic, and it's one of the things that, one reason why people doubt that it can reach mainstream adoptance is because it's difficult to understand. And so I'll do my best to explain some concepts, although I don't know if I can explain it perfectly. But ultimately, this public bank that I talked about is maintained by everyone all at the same time. And anyone who's running Bitcoin software can see the balance, can see where all 21 million coins are at the same time. And when someone moves coins, when I transfer 1 Bitcoin from me to you, that information, the fact that transaction occurred and it had a valid signature from me, from my private key, that's going to propagate through the network, and all the users of the system are going to look at that and agree that it happened.
I see.
And all the people are tracking all 21 million coins, and they're all going to update their databases, and the system depends on those databases all being synchronized, that at all times everyone can agree.
So if you participate, you are part of the whole network. It's not just some big computer in the sky somewhere or 4 of them. It's everybody.
Yeah. So tell you what, I'll give you a good example, a great analogy, something called yapstones. And I forget exactly where they were created, but it was a small tribe on a little group of islands out in the Pacific, I believe, and somewhat separated from civilization. And they don't have fiat, and they don't even have gold, but they still, as regular civilizations, need some form of currency. So they use something called yapstones, which are these giant stones, which could be 20 feet by 20 feet. They're extraordinarily heavy, and they typically use these for ownership. They'll give 3 of these stones to someone else in exchange for a house. Now, the thing about yapstones is that they behave very much like a currency. You have a certain number of them, and you give them to others in exchange for goods, whether it's chickens or houses. But the interesting thing about yapstones is because they're so big that it's really inconvenient to move them. So what the community did, this tribe did, was they kind of mutually agreed that it doesn't really matter where the yapstone is. All that matters is everyone knows who owns them. And so if I give you three yapstones for your house, rather than having to get a trailer or trucks, which probably don't even exist on the island, to move those, all that matters is that I've kind of publicly announced, and everyone in the tribe knows that I'm transferring those stones. And it doesn't matter whether the stones are in my front yard or in the middle of the town square. But everyone knows where those stones are and can agree that yes, I own those 3 stones. Someone else does. And in one particular case, there was actually a stone that was being transported on a boat which sank, and now that stone is sitting at the bottom of an ocean. But it's still being used as currency, that people still own it. People refer to that as the stone that's at the bottom of the ocean, and Joe owns that stone, and he still has the authority to transfer ownership. So this system actually survives with very much like Bitcoin. It basically is a very simple version of Bitcoin, in a sense that the whole system, nothing physical is actually moving. There may be something physical that's represented, like in this case the stones, but nothing is moving. The act of paying someone is simply getting everyone to recognize that that transaction has occurred, and everyone kind of updates their knowledge of who owns what.
Interesting. Well,
and Bitcoin behaves very similar to that.
Within the Bitcoin world, there's something called a wallet. I guess that's one of the other components I'm not really familiar with, or I don't understand.
Mm-hmm. So when I talked earlier about your bank account number in the public Bitcoin bank, and the private keys, which are your signing, that you use to sign checks to move money, a wallet is just a file on your computer that holds that information. So if I claim that I have 20 Bitcoins, that means that I can point out 20 Bitcoins that are in, amidst the 21 million that exist. I can point out 20 Bitcoins and say that I own those, and I can prove that by actually signing a check to move them. So when I transfer money to you, I need to create a transaction, and I'm going to reference, say, 20 Bitcoins. I'm going to say, I'm going to spend these 20 Bitcoins, and I'm going to transfer them to you. But the network doesn't believe it because it's a public bank. You could look at those 20 coins and say, hey, I want those. So you're going to create the same transaction. The difference is that I have the signing pen. I have the private key, which is a little chunk of data that solves a mathematical proof that I'm authorizing that movement. And your wallet is just a file on your computer that holds your signing keys.
I get it. Okay, I get that. I think I heard just the other day that the IRS was going to then want you to report your Bitcoin transactions as though it was an investment. So you're going to be paying, I guess, gains and losses on it. If somehow there's inflation, monetary inflation, there's too many Bitcoins, you sort of gain a value loss. You have to report it on your taxes. If it increases in value, you have to report that on your taxes.
So remember, the quantity of Bitcoins isn't changing. It's generally just the relative perceived value of them that's changing. Mm-hmm. So from the IRS perspective, right now there's about 13 million Bitcoins that exist, and there will ever be 21 million. They just haven't been distributed yet. Going back to mining, that's what mining is. Mining is a process by which you contribute computing power to secure the network, and in return you get some of that 21 million that's being distributed. So the coins, there's a certain number of them, but the price fluctuates based on what people are willing to pay them for. It's purely a supply and demand driven system, and it's dependent on the fact that they're easy to move, they're easy to identify. You can prove that they're owned. I can prove that I transfer them to you, and it's a scarce resource. And because of that, if there's a killer app that comes out and everyone wants Bitcoins, well, they're going to have to spread those 21 million Bitcoins between all the people that want to use them, and that means its value is necessarily going to go up.
Plus, as everybody starts using it and becomes, as the adoption proliferates, I think it would probably, stabilize at a certain point. I know a number of people, they use Bitcoin as a transaction. Instead of a credit card, they take money out of their U.S. bank, put it into Bitcoin, buy a meal at a restaurant, which I know there's different restaurants, different places are accepting it, and then they transfer it back to the U.S. dollar. I think in the future, probably, people will probably retain it in their Bitcoin because there won't be inflation. It'll be stable.
Right.
I don't want people to think we're not going to talk about Armory, but I just wanted to throw that out there and kind of allude to the future, which we'll be talking about here in a minute, I guess.
I'll tell you one of my favorite features of Bitcoin. Is that what you just talked about, spending money at a restaurant or buying something online. Maybe it's less about what good Bitcoin is and really more about how terrible credit cards are. But when you get online and you give someone a credit card, your credit card number, to pay for something, it's actually a very insecure process. Even if you're using SSL and using the standard internet encryption, what you're doing is you're giving someone the 16 digits on your card, which is all they need to authorize payment. And you are essentially assuming that they're only going to authorize the payment that you think they're going to authorize. That you bought $100 on Amazon, you give Amazon your credit card number, and technically, if Amazon wanted to, they could charge $2,000 that credit card number. Of course, there's laws in place and to prevent that, but that's how credit card fraud exists, because you transfer the actual. In Bitcoin speak, you'd be giving everyone the private key and hoping that they're only going to sign what they're owed. But when you pay in Bitcoin, you're not giving someone the keys to your wallet. You're not giving them the kingdom. You're authorizing a single payment. So when I get on a website or I go to a store and I pay with Bitcoin, they say, please pay me 1 Bitcoin, and I authorize a 1 Bitcoin payment. I sign it, and I give them a signed transaction, and that is how I transferred money to them. And there's nothing they could do to take more money. There's nothing that someone who gets that transaction in Nigeria, which is known for credit card fraud and various things like that, there's nothing that anyone there can do to authorize more payments. And that's one of the beauties of the system, is that you are authorizing individual payments. You're not just giving someone the whole thing and expecting them, hoping that they'll only take what you've agreed on.
As I look through some of your documents I read before this interview, I saw that you have to authorize, this is, 1 Bitcoin, I'm going to give it to Bob. Bob just can't come and say, give me your Bitcoin because I have your number. It doesn't work that way. So It takes 2 people to agree. And as I look through a little bit of Armory there, you have it set up so more than 1 and 1 could agree. You can have a number of people agreeing before that money, that Bitcoin, leaves your wallet and gets transferred, to Bob, right?
And that's one of the beauties of Bitcoin. Everything we've talked about so far is what people kind of see Bitcoin for, which is a system of money, and you can transfer money from one person to another. And I kind of relate that vision of Bitcoin as that cliche about your brain, about how you only use 5 or 10% of your brain. But actually, Bitcoin is so much more. It turns out that that 10% is very useful, being able, everything I just said. But Bitcoin actually has a whole very rich capability that, in many ways, it's programmable money. And when I talk about sending money from me to you, it's just a very simple program that transfers the money from me to you. But you can do very advanced things. You can even write contracts into Bitcoin, like into payments, in such a way that certain mathematical properties or problems have to be solved before money can be moved. And the most common would be something like, well, here's some money, and I want it to not move. Here's some money, and here's 3 public keys, 3 people, 3 bank account numbers. Here's 3 bank account numbers, and I want to make sure that this money can't move unless there's signatures from at least 2 of them. Or you could do 4 of 7, where you could say, here's 7 identities. This money is not allowed to move unless there's signatures from 4. And that's a very, very powerful concept, because it has built-in segregation of duties. That if you're a company handling millions of dollars, as your company bank account, if you're holding millions of Bitcoins, you don't want to have just a single key that controls those millions of dollars, because you could have an employee steal that data and take the money themselves. Instead, you can use something like this, where you'd have like a CEO, or a CFO and a CTO and a CEO, and you need signatures from 2 of them in order to move the money. And that means that there's no longer kind of any single points of failure, that there's one person that can just
That's pretty
take the money
interesting
and
because if
run.
you think about, you can make it as complicated as you want, maybe for billions of dollars, and make it as easy as you want, say one person or something for, say, a petty cash account or something like that.
Exactly.
So that you can have as much security in it as you want.
Yeah, exactly. And there's even more complex things that you can do with it, and I won't go too much into it. But for instance, we developed a program, so to say, a Bitcoin program that allows two people to bet on an event, and that there's a mediator who's going to post a code depending on which team wins. Say you're going to bet on a sport, whether one of two teams is going to win. You can actually program with the network a program that says that if this code is revealed, then this person can take the money, and if this code is revealed, then this person can take the money. And these two people can, for instance, bet on this event. They could be drunk at a bar, and they could place a bet, and they could never see each other again. And the money will just end up where it's supposed to go at the end. And maybe betting isn't the most ubiquitous high demand feature for it, but I mean it's something that can be done. And there's a whole, I guess you could say, research field of Bitcoin devoted to creative ways that you can use Bitcoin outside of just money, that you can use it for contracts. Various agreements.
FDR, the Great Depression, Franklin Delano, or whatever he pronounced his name, FDR Roosevelt, Delano or something like that. It's got a middle name or something. But he there's a long story behind it. But what he did, he outlawed Americans to own gold. Now, Americans used to be able to write contracts with a specific amount of gold in it. And then to avoid any inflation or deflation, people then would have, it's paper, but it's an IOU basically. It says, if I want, I could demand payment in gold in the future, and then FDR made that type of thing illegal, which allowed the government then to cause inflation or deflation, depends on how they manage it. Now, as I look at Bitcoin, there's no way for that to occur. You can set it up for the scenario there you said for betting, and that same amount could be transaction 20 years from now if they wanted or whatever. But it's still that amount that you said, say it's half a Bitcoin for a certain bar bet or something. But it's it's pretty creative how this is coming about. I see this as the magic, really, of free people coming up with a better system. Now, because of that, I can also see the governments of the world trying to do something against it. What's the acceptance of governments now? It doesn't look like they're avoiding it or trying to push it away.
Well, they've been very cautious, as a bunch of businesses have been. I mean, something this new and this disruptive, so to say, is not something that's just going to be embraced, all around. I think the Bitcoin community has done a great job of cuddling up to lawmakers and kind of educating, being proactive, going to Capitol Hill. There's a couple kind of Bitcoin activist communities that are basically going and trying to show people that Bitcoin is more than some of its early history, which was involved with drug trade because it was very efficient at moving money anonymously. That Bitcoin kind of grew up as kind of this rogue, black market system, but that its value is so much greater than that, and that they shouldn't be using that as their basis for deciding whether this should be outlawed or how it should be treated. That this is more than just a tool that can be used for money laundering, that it's actually something that can spur economic innovation, that can make the world more efficient. So there's certainly, there's a lot of countries in the world, and, many of them have had very negative reactions to Bitcoin. I think there's a couple countries where it's almost explicitly banned. But so far we've seen fairly positive reactions from at least the U.S. I mean, U.S. is a huge bureaucracy, but, I'd say maybe a year and a half ago there was people pushing for it to be just straight outlawed because they didn't see the use, lawmakers who didn't see the use of Bitcoin outside of buying drugs. And now there's actually a somewhat open dialogue for it. And there was something in the Washington, D.C., the Chamber of Digital Commerce is really pushing Bitcoin and educating lawmakers about it. And although the results haven't been perfect, there's still, we feel, very positive progress, that people are starting to understand it, and the people who make decisions and help write laws definitely don't see it as a negative thing anymore. They still have lots of questions, and they're still very conservative and not jumping too quickly on it, but at least it's not, the assumption is not money laundering and drugs right off the bat, and I think that's
I think
very
it was
important.
early on people were talking about, well, it's just some sort of black market thing for drugs. That was people probably more of ignorance, and if it's a currency, if you made that same argument for currency, you'd say, well, we can't use the U.S. currency because they use it to transact drug transactions, They
Right.
smuggle with it, and they buy stuff you're not supposed to buy with it. So that argument could be made either way. Just like any technology, it could be used for whatever humans come up with, basically. And
Absolutely.
what you're
And-
doing with, well, let me just finish my thought there. And what you're doing, it seems like you're putting in what's needed to make it a secure transaction so anybody could use it. Now, one thing I noticed that there was some sort of, the FBI sees some Bitcoins, and they were able to, because of whatever, some illicit activity. So it's not like something that can be avoided or something that only, the black market get away with. There's, in order to, bottom line is, government, if it's bad, they're going to find it, and they're probably going to get their Bitcoins, and take it away from the bad people. They're going to find ways to do it. And at any rate, you were going to say something?
Actually, what was I? Oh, it's a shame that that Bitcoin kind of had the torchbearer. The torchbearer of Bitcoin was basically the black market and illegal activity, and part of that is just because it was so new that, and it had these properties that made it very good for that, and those were the people that needed it the most. So to say, like, yes, I believe that everyone in the world will have a use case for Bitcoin, but they're not. Their business, their drug business, doesn't depend, because they're not running a drug business. They don't depend on Bitcoin as much as the drug dealers do. And so when it was very new, the people who needed it the most were using it, which happened to be the illicit market. But I think now there's been a lot of things that, it's calmed down a bit. There's been a lot more wider use cases. There's been more businesses getting in and showing the value of it. For regular commerce, and like I mentioned earlier, reducing identity theft, and just general security. So it's changed a lot. I mean, when I first got in, Bitcoin was almost a taboo word, and now it's kind of a exciting, new technology world.
It's also about personal liberties too, because truly the government, they're always. If you go to the bank, you withdraw too much money, they want to know what you're going to do with it. I don't know what the level is. It's like $5,000 or $7,000 or $10,000, something like that. And then you got to tell them you have to file a paperwork with the government. It's another darn business. America was founded on exceptional forms of liberty, and now because of some illicit activity out there, they're trying to track everything you do. So I can see the use of it to some anonymity a little bit out there, but it's still money, and there still has to be, like, I know that Armory has a cold file system?
Storage.
Cold storage system.
It's called cold storage.
And let's get in a little bit about Armory, because it sounds like you have some pretty good security mechanisms behind it that actually will propel Bitcoin to more enterprise-wide level stuff to personal level stuff. So, tell us a little bit about Armory.
So I'll just tell you a little bit about one of the problems with Bitcoin, which is that for all of its power, being able to move millions of dollars across the world instantaneously without central banks or whatever, that also comes lots of risks. And one of those risks is that Bitcoin is very much like the Wild West, that you do have full control over, yourself and your guns and your security, but you can also, in the case of Bitcoin, you also have full control to lose your money, or to mishandle it, or to have it stolen. And, one of the benefits of our antiquated money system is that, consumer protections have been built in, and, just by law. And unfortunately, that doesn't exist in Bitcoin. So while there are some very powerful notions, new capabilities available with Bitcoin, there's also some new risks. And for instance, when I talked about your private keys being kept in a wallet file, and that when I authorize a payment to you, that I'm gonna access that private key and I'm gonna use it to sign a transaction. That also means that anyone who gets on my computer and gets access to that file can also sign any transaction. That they then have the same information that I do that allows me to move the money. So that allows them to steal my money. And this opens up a system that while it's very powerful, at the same time, there's kind of, it's raised the stakes for security as well. And now you've got people who have, $10,000 of essentially very liquid cash on their computer, that if someone were to get access to that, they could just take it. And so far, the world hasn't really had any information that is that liquid and that much like cash that can just be taken so easily. So this opens up kind of along with all the benefits of Bitcoin, need to come better ways for people to protect themselves and to do things right. And if you drop a $100 bill off a boat, maybe attached to a rock, so it sinks to the bottom of the ocean, there's no one you can go to complain to get that back. That there's no way to prove that you did that, and that you can go to some bank or to the reserve and say, hey, can you reissue that $100 for me? And the same thing with Bitcoin. If you do something stupid, then that money can be lost forever, and there's no one that can help you. And so Armory is a program that helps you, takes all these things into account and provides a system that helps people not do stupid things. It helps them protect the private keys so other people can't access it. It helps protect them if their computer dies and that information is lost because they have a backup of it. And it provides tools to do what I mentioned earlier, the multi-signature transactions, where you can actually have money that requires signatures from multiple people in order to be moved. And these are all things that are going to be needed for Bitcoin to move forward.
And one thing I noticed in there, you talk about these different wallets. One of the wallets is just I forgot what it said in your literature. It was just a visible wallet. So, for example, an accounts manager.
Watching only.
Say again?
Watching only.
Watching only, yeah. So that could be something like, it could be a clerk or accounts receivable payable person could see the balance, can balance the books from it, but can't transact that business, right? But
exactly.
But he or she might have control, maybe one or two signers, if you will have control of a smaller fund because, the risk is low. But the big bank account where, I don't know, say Chevrolet has all their money or something like that at a bank,
right.
Well, then the board of directors, the president, a few people then would use that. Now, so I understand that's great internal controls. So, and then you have something involved where you have the cold storage, you have a paper backup, you have some things that no one else has. I don't understand how that paper backup works, or I guess you can print it. You can have one or two backups, have one in your office, put one in a safety deposit box somewhere, bury one under a tree somewhere, I guess.
Here, yeah, I'll elaborate on that. So when I talked about the signing keys and the bank account numbers, one of the reasons I made Armory was because the software that was out there always kept those two pieces of information together. That the same place that you hold the account numbers to be able to see your balance and receive money, to give to people so they can pay you. The same software was also handling that sensitive the signing keys that are needed to move the money. And that made the system very insecure or really more appropriate for smaller amounts of money. So what Armory did was the concept existed before Armory did, but no one had really done it. And it was the idea that you can keep those two pieces of information separate, that you can have one computer that has just the account numbers and can receive the money and verify that the money was received. In the case of a chief financial officer, they can see all the activity on that wallet. They can see all the money that's gone in and out. They can see the balance and how much is there, but they can't move it because the signing keys aren't there. So Armory innovated this idea that you can keep that data separate from the data that's needed to actually move the money. And in the case of that, you can keep the bank account numbers on your regular computer, but you're going to keep the signing keys on a computer that's never touched the internet, or on a super secure system that's used for less things, that has better security controls. And that's called cold storage, that you're keeping that money in cold storage because the visual is that computer is frozen, in bank vault underground, somewhere in the Antarctic, that you need to access that computer buried 100 feet under the ice in order to move the money. But you still have the information needed to receive the money. And that's what cold storage is it's this idea that you can distribute, you can split the roles of receiving versus
You were talking
sending.
about the private key. Well, that's what you're trying to separate from kind of the internet, if you will. And that private key
Exactly.
is written down, or it's on a USB and kept somewhere.
Oh, right. So what I just described was cold storage, the idea of separating those pieces of data that you can keep the really sensitive data at higher security. But what that doesn't solve is what if that higher security system is lost or it stops working? That piece of data is needed to move the money, and if that data is lost, then that money is permanently lost as well. And so what you want is to be able to combine that security system with as much, it's as important as security, is also protecting yourself from losing your money. And so we have a system, basically if you were to use other software, you would have to back up periodically. You have to create periodic backups to make sure that your money is secure, that if your computer dies, that you have some way to recover your money. And Armory innovated the idea that you don't need to do periodic backups. The way our wallet is created, the entire wallet is created from a little piece of data that you can print out on a sheet of paper, and you can secure that sheet of paper, and that will protect you from anything that could go wrong. You can use your wallet for 20 years, collect millions of dollars, and then your computer dies, and that paper backup that you saved, put in your safe deposit box 20 years ago, will help you recover
It
all
seems
your
kind
money.
of silly that nobody came up with that idea before, that to actually take it and put it somewhere else. Because I was reading about other forms of security out there. A lot of them are backups. They talk about how to use it properly. Like, don't use the same address, and then there's certain things you have to avoid, like malicious software and things like that. And this is one of your characteristics or your features that avoids that, evidently.
So everyone is aware of backups, that you need backups, but the idea that you can use your wallet for many years and still that the backup that you made 20 years ago still protects the money that you receive tomorrow. That is what the innovative part is that you're actually receiving money tomorrow that you didn't have at the time the backup was made, and yet that backup will still work. And that's the part that was challenging. And it's actually due to some I want to say creative, but it's not really creative. It's due to some cryptographic properties of the system of Bitcoin that we're able to do that. And it's been so successful and so well regarded. That's one of the primary reasons that Armory became popular, that now all the other wallet software is moving in that direction, that they're all implementing the same cryptography that allows you to do that one-time paper backup. Whereas other systems might require you to periodically make new backups. And we know how bad people are at making backups, that even if they have the best intentions and are very attentive, that they may simply forget, or they may switch computers and their backup system breaks and they procrastinate on setting it back up again. That to us, that's all unnecessary. That you can just you create a wallet and you create a backup of that wallet.
And so
and
how
it'll
does
always
that,
work.
of course, that is a private key, I guess, because those out there, and because everybody sees what's in this account or whatever, your wallet, right? Say there's 10 Bitcoins in an account. You created it 5 years ago. You had the paper backup or the USB backup or something over here off to the side. Now, during this time, have you been transacting business within that wallet?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
You can use the wallet exactly as you would. You could have gone through 10 million Bitcoins. The original Bitcoins that you had when the backup were made are totally gone, but you have 10 million new Bitcoins. And the backup
That
will
backup
still
allows you
protect those.
basically to see the balance. Get in there and see the balance. This is what I have, I'm guessing.
Well, it backs up the signing keys for all those. So, of course, you can see the balance. If you have the signing keys, you can also get the bank account numbers.
Okay.
So
So what's if you look at, I know that like the worst case scenario, if I if I'm a bank somewhere, of course, look at all the worst case scenarios in history. That's why we have the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or something I think that's how it's called.
Right.
We have that because banks failed and people lost their money in the past. So it's an insurance fund, if you will, that goes out there. The federal government backs it, and we don't lose our money up to 100,000 or 200,000, whatever it is today. Insurance, there's not really an insurance on it. The insurance really with Bitcoin is that you can't manipulate it. You can't lose it. You can't make bad financial decisions. If it's I guess the bank, if they hold your Bitcoins, they could. But
right.
But if you own your own Bitcoins, the only risk you have is your poor financial decisions. Or,
right.
And in the past, I guess, or maybe your computer crashes, there's a fire, and it burns up your computer. Just like the bank in the past, it used to be if the bank burnt and you had money in the vault, I guess I don't know how the bank would have, you'd lose your money.
They got robbed.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Got robbed, yeah.
So let me just back up a little bit, give kind of a higher altitude view of things. What I just talked about was how people manage money themselves. And what you're saying is absolutely right, that when you're holding your Bitcoin, as I just described, there is no one else who has access to it that can make bad decisions with it, that can fractionalize it, lend it out. I mean, you have that full control, which also means you also have the same responsibilities. But that with that control, right, is the risks, and that's kind of the fundamental question of Bitcoin adoptance is yes, you have all this extra power and you have all this protection from inflation and from people mishandling your money, but you also have these extra risks involved, which could involve just losing your money. People don't make, even if it's easy, they don't even make one backup. So, that's definitely a risk. So, I think taking a higher level view, there are wallets like Armory which let you take that full control, but the ecosystem is in many ways dominated by, at least at the consumer level, by services that try to kind of compromise the two positions, that basically allow you to hold Bitcoin, but they are essentially holding it for you, or they are maybe one of three signers for the money to kind of add a certain level of security, and they kind of act as a bank or as an intermediary for handling that money. And I think for widespread adoptance, that's going to be an important part of the system. That even though Bitcoin is built and has all these great properties that you can handle it yourself, that's too high risk for a lot of people, regardless of what the benefits are. That they can still get some of the benefits even if someone else is holding it. And things, when you hear the word Coinbase, BitPay, any of the exchanges, a lot of those are places that you can hold your money and you're trusting them to do the security properly. And up until recently, there really haven't been any insurance options, and we see that as actually at least Armory sees that as a critical gap in adoptance. That if the option is holding 100K in your bank account or 100K in worth of Bitcoin, that even though the Bitcoin maybe has some different value to you, hopefully more value in terms of how it can be used and the protections it gives you, that it's kind of an all or nothing investment. If that company goes out of business or one of their employees steals all the money, you're really SOL. And one of the things Armory is trying to do is develop secure systems to allow these places to be insured and to try to help insurance companies understand the risks so that they can insure them. We don't expect there to be an FDIC exactly of Bitcoin, but at the very least what we'd like to see is that anyone who's holding other people's money, which we expect to be a large part of the Bitcoin market, will be able to acquire insurance, and insurance companies will be able to evaluate the risks and understand that this company is doing what's needed to prevent losing the money. And if they do lose the money for whatever reason, that they'll cover the losses and the users.
Kind of like Visa does today, I guess, right? If there's
right.
They charge a percentage though, but quite a bit percentage to the banks, or to the merchants, that is. But there's a little bit of insurance back there.
There's so when you're using Bitcoin raw, so to say, when you're handling it yourself, none of those consumer protections exist. And I think that kind of at the consumer level, when we're going to get grandma involved and people who are not very tech savvy, that there's going to be a compromise where you're going to have these intermediates handling the money and the security and providing some of those consumer protections. But the nice thing is that if they want to, or they want to move the money and someone doesn't want to pay for those protections, then they can just handle
people
the money
definitely
themselves.
risk adverse. I actually see Bitcoin as being, it's a free market approach, so it's going to adopt to what the users want, what the market wants. The government will adopt to what the politicians want and their voters want. So I think it actually could lend pressure to, modern currencies, fiat currencies, to be more stable, and yet allow people to transact, have a little bit more authority and control over their own finances. It's like a normal path for, it's a normal evolution, I think. I mean, for currencies and for a way to pay for things. I think it's a fascinating future. Listening to you, when I was thinking about Bitcoin in the past, I looked into it. I heard it on some other shows, saw it in the Wall Street Journal. I looked into it. My biggest fear was, well, okay, who's going to hold these Bitcoins for me? I didn't understand those things, and I'm like, well, I'll wait a little longer until it gets more secure and people adopt it more, and I understand it better. But now I understand it a lot better, that right now you're in control of it. You're not really giving it to a third party. Now, unless you voluntarily want to give it to a third party, you like those protections. And then I think that's a free market approach. You can have it either way. And I also see it as, like I said earlier just a second ago, that it's competition to the government to make them more responsible for the fiat currencies out there. And it's a better way of transacting business. There's less transaction costs to the merchants. And now I understand, too, you have the wallet, you have the private key, the public key, you have offline storage, online storage, you have backups, and then there's encryption,
multi-signature coins,
the multi-signature coins out there for enterprise level stuff, or even maybe just a married couple, maybe, or a couple who has their child, right? They want. I remember having a passbook savings account when I was a kid. My mom would have to sign for it, and I would sign for it. So, things like that. So, Bitcoin definitely is going to it's taken hold. I know it is, because I keep hearing more and more about it. But now that I understand it better, I'm going to be a user of Bitcoin. I can tell you that much. Yeah, fascinating show. Thank you so much for. Actually, before we wrap up, did I miss anything? Anything you want to bring up about Bitcoin or Armory that I missed that I think would be really useful?
Yeah, I'll just pitch Armory a bit, since we didn't cover it too much. I just wanted to kind of fill in the gaps and just say, what Armory has done when I mentioned developing cold storage and developing these these efficient backups. What we're doing is we're trying to innovate kind of the side of the system devoted to security and not losing your money. Others are working on making Bitcoin easy to use, which may involve less security, and we're working on making Bitcoin secure, which may involve less convenience or being harder to use. What we found is that a lot of companies want to get into Bitcoin, and they want to start handling Bitcoin. They want to invest in Bitcoin. You have hedge funds that want to help people essentially bet on Bitcoin, but no one knows how to handle it. And they don't want to be responsible for all their investors, liable to their investors when they lose $30 million worth of Bitcoin. So, and that's essentially what Armory does, is we provide services. We basically provide software, which is actually free, to go out and use Bitcoin, but then we also provide consulting, security consulting, training. We provide custom software solutions and integration for these large enterprises who are very good at the financial side of things to help integrate them into the Bitcoin system without the risk of losing.
Thank you again for joining us today. And I'm going to go back and I think this is one of the programs I probably listen to after I do my editing, of course, but that I'm going to listen to time and time again just to kind of understand the Bitcoin and how it's going to fit into things. Interesting topic for sure. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. It's been really a good show. I've learned so much today, and I think it's going to be useful, actually applicable and useful to people's lives going into the future. I know it's the future. It's a future for money. There's going to be all kinds of futures for money, but it's definitely a future. So thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks for having me.